Hello and welcome to my channel. This is going to be a landscape in graphite, but I'm going to use a slightly less conventional approach. Let's have a look. I'm going to use toned paper and I'm going to prime it with a little bit of clear gesso to get a bit more tooth. All I need is a thin layer of it, and I can spread it evenly, like I said, a very thin layer. When it dries, it will dry clear. It will be transparent. I'm using the Winsor & Newton clear gesso. The paper I'm using is a grey toned paper called Clay by Fabriano. And pay no attention to all of those colored pencils you saw at the beginning. I'm going to use graphite pencils now. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw the line of the water, because it's going to be moonlight on the river type of scene. And then I'm going to sketch some of the elements of the landscape, some parts of the riverbank and stuff like that, and maybe some hills and mountains in the distance. Now for the moon, I'm going to use this token and go around it with a white pencil. The reason why I said this was going to be an unconventional approach is because I'm using a toned paper and I'm going to use a little bit of white pencil for some of the brightest details, and for all the rest I'm just going to use graphite pencils. So once again, the paper, which is about 9 times 11 inches in size, is Fabriano toned paper called Clay. It's a very light grey paper. I primed it with some clear gesso. I used the Winsor & Newton clear gesso. And the white pencil I'm using is the Polychromos white colored pencil. And the graphite pencils, which are going to be my main drawing tool, are the Koh-i-Noor graphite pencils. The range is from, let's say, HB to 8B. I'm just using a tortillon to add some of the darker details to the moon to make it a little bit more interesting. And the advantage of using a white pencil on a toned paper is that you can easily establish a greater range of value. So you put in your lightest lights, you already have your mid-tone, and then after that you can start working with whatever graphite pencils you want to use, or charcoal for that matter. And that way you will easily establish great contrast between the darker details and those lightest, brightest details that you can do with a white pencil. Anyway, because I want this to be a slightly cloudy scene, I'm going to put in some clouds, but I'm going to start with a very light pencil. I'm going to use an HB. Now, graphite behaves a little bit differently on this surface because, like I said, the paper was primed with clear gesso, which has a little bit of tooth, actually a lot more tooth than you're normally used to with regular papers. So on this surface, graphite looks a little bit more like charcoal. It's easier to blend, and it's also quite a bit darker and more matte. So first I'm blending it with a Q-tip. And after that, I'm gonna try to even it out a little bit with a brush, but first with a Q-tip because it blends really well, plus I can use it to create some smaller shapes, like some smaller fluffy clouds. And like I said, I want to blend that thoroughly because I don't want those lines, I don't want that texture for the clouds. This paper primed with clear gesso creates quite a bit of texture, so you want to blend it whenever you don't like that texture. The texture is good because it creates an illusion of detail, but that's not what we need right now. I also use the white pencil for some of the lighter parts of the clouds which are illuminated by that moonlight. And then at the bottom I'm going to add some more clouds. I'm going to use the same approach, blend that nicely, and as you can see, it looks like a nice cloudy moonlit sky. A little bit more detail with a white pencil, and then I blend that in as well. And the top part of the scene is pretty much done. Now I'm going to draw this hill or mountain in the distance. It's going to be a little bit darker than the background now, but I shouldn't go too dark too fast because it's still a part of the background, so I'm going to need to draw much darker elements in the foreground. I'm going to blend this now. I'm going to use a brush. Now this is just the first layer because I will want to create a little bit of variation on that hill, on those slopes, because I want it to look like some parts of it are covered with trees or clusters of trees, and I'm also making some suggestions of trees at the top of that slope. I want these tiny shapes to stand out against the brighter background of the sky. And like I said, I want some parts of that slope to be covered with trees. I want the rest of it to look like it's maybe bare or rocky. So it's going to be a little bit lighter than those areas which are covered by trees. So I'm going to use a tortillon a little bit maybe to push in the graphite and to make some of these shapes a little bit darker and blend them a little bit. A little bit more about this surface. So when you apply clear gesso, it becomes like a sanded paper, similar to some of the papers that are used for pastels like UArt or Pastel Mat and some of the others, but the tooth is a little bit more rough. It works really well with pastel. It works with charcoal, it works with graphite, it works with colored pencils. It works with wet media as well. But I like to use it sometimes to experiment a little bit. I've done landscapes in graphite on clear gesso before, and what I liked about it is how quick you can work, because it's very easy to establish larger, darker areas and to blend them. So in a way, graphite becomes a little bit more similar to charcoal, but at the same time you have some of the advantages of graphite because you can use multiple grades and you can vary the amount of value, and you can work with maybe a little bit more precision because of the nature of the graphite pencils. But the thing is that on this surface it's kind of difficult to erase pretty much anything, graphite especially, because graphite is a lubricant and it sticks to the surface of the paper and it gets kind of greasy, and it's very difficult to erase it if you use regular erasers. With a kneaded eraser you can actually lift up quite a bit of the material, but you have to keep reshaping the kneaded eraser in order for it to be able to soak up the graphite. So if you want to clean something up, it's better to use a kneaded eraser rather than rather than the regular eraser or any type of rubber eraser, whether it is a precision eraser or a regular eraser. So there's another part of the riverbank here kind of popping into the scene from the left side. This one is a little bit closer to our viewpoint. It's a part of the midground, I suppose. So near the bottom there are some rocks, but at the top it's a little bit darker because it's covered with some grass and bushes maybe. And then I'm going to throw in a few trees at the top of it. I'm going to make some tall coniferous trees here. And I want those tall dark shapes to stand out against the lighter background of the sky. Basically I'm creating contrast and tension, but these are not going to be the darkest shapes that I'm going to use. Or maybe they're going to be one of the darkest, but I plan to maybe use something even a little bit darker in the foreground. Basically for the darkest shapes I'm going to use 7B and 8B, where the 8B is going to go for the darkest details. So just like this, I draw the vertical shape, the line that is supposed to indicate the shape and the size of the tree trunk, and then I draw the horizontal shapes like tree branches or clusters of foliage on the side. I'm throwing in a few more trees here, some of them are smaller than the others, and maybe a few more here to the left as well, to fill in that part of the scene and also to create contrast between this mid-ground area and the mountain slope in the background. It's always important to try to create that feeling of depth and distance in drawing, because when you're doing landscapes, because just by controlling the amount of value, or rather manipulating the amount of value, you can make things look closer or further away. So those are the trees on the left. Now I'm going to move on to the rest of the scene. I've pretty much done the half of it. On the right side we're also going to have some riverbank and some trees, but in the middle I'm going to add some details to the water. I'm going to make some parts of it a little bit darker and others maybe a little bit lighter, and maybe some details like some ripples in the water and things like that. So I'm going to make this part to the left a little bit darker to match the amount of value of the objects above the water, because that part of the riverbank is darker and it's supposed to be reflecting. It's supposed to be reflecting that darker shape. And I'm using a kneaded eraser to make some indications of lighter reflections, or reflections of those lighter details above the water. The reflection doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to match the objects above the water perfectly, because it's going to be distorted anyway by the movement and the ripples in the water. Here I'm drawing some more rocks on the other side of the riverbank. I'm going to start with some smaller shapes and then draw some slightly larger shapes. Here and there, as you can see, I drew some smaller rocks kind of detached from the rest, but barely showing again above the surface of the water. And now I'm going to draw a couple of larger, chunkier ones here at the bottom or to the right. Again, I'm going to make the top part a little bit darker and draw some trees on top of it. I went over this with a brush. It feels like I'm ruining it because I had some nice looking shapes there, but the thing is that it does have to be darker. So I'm going to rework it. Anyway, I'm using the white pencil again. I'm going to use it to draw some reflections of the moonlight now in the water. And like I said, that's the advantage of using a white pencil on a toned paper, because it just allows you to establish that contrast very quickly. So I'm going to make it look like it's a little bit distorted by the ripples, like it's broken up into smaller shapes. And I'm going to have another group of rocks here at the bottom to the left. I made the surface of the water a little bit darker above those rocks in order for the lighter parts of them to stand out against that darker value. And I added a little bit of detail and texture to them. Generally, whatever is closer to our viewpoint is going to have to appear a little bit darker and more detailed, so I just gave it a little bit more texture. And on this surface it's very easy to create that texture because a paper that's been primed with clear gesso is very toothy, so any type of pencil is just going to create texture, and you can use that texture to create that illusion of detail. But of course, at the same time, if you don't like or if you don't need that texture in a particular part of the scene, you can always blend it and soften it, as you can see with some of the background parts of the scene that I've previously blended, especially the clouds and the mountain in the distance. Now I'm starting to draw some trees here on the right side. And these are, I'm going to start with some slightly smaller ones, and then I'm going to draw some really large tall ones on the right side, all the way to the right edge of the paper. So again, a few more vertical shapes. This time these are a little bit larger and taller, and a little bit of shadow under them. And then once I have those tree trunks, those vertical shapes, I just start drawing the branches and the clusters of foliage forming around them. You want to have, in order to make convincing looking canopies, you want to have a lot of branches kind of overlapping and creating that illusion of thickness and density of the canopies and the foliage. When I say foliage, I'm talking about clusters of needles, because these are coniferous trees. So I just kind of draw a bunch of these small shapes or lines overlapping a little bit, and I'm drawing the branches so the ones at the top are curving a little bit more upwards, and the ones at the bottom, which are longer and heavier, are drooping down a bit more. That way the shape of the tree looks a bit more convincing. Some more rocks here to complete the scene in the bottom right corner. Some smaller ones near the water. I go over them a little bit with a pencil to give them a little bit of value, but also a little bit of random detail and texture. And then I'm going to add some reflections here. Again, irregular looking shapes broken because of the broken into smaller shapes because of the ripples in the water. If I feel like I need to lift up a little bit of graphite to make something lighter, I go in with a kneaded eraser, and finally I will try to make some of these rocks a little bit lighter by applying a little bit of white pencil on top of them to further increase the range of value. And I'm just refining the appearance of these reflections of the rocks on the right side, trying to make that look a bit more convincing, and playing around with a kneaded eraser and a pencil, just switching back and forth between those. But the scene is largely done now. I'm just going to make this reflection of the moonlight a little bit longer, kind of extend it a little bit closer towards the mid-ground area. I put my signature over on the left side here, and I made the right side of the rocks here a little bit darker. I felt that it needed more shadow. Anyway, the drawing is done. I hope you like the way it turned out. Don't forget to check out my other videos and give me a like and comment. Let me know what you think. And for longer videos and much more content, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.